Hey guys, checking in with you on a Monday, September 19th, getting deeper into September now, and of course the big news has been and continues to be Fiona. Fiona, Category 1 hurricane with winds of 90 miles an hour. That's the 2 o'clock advisory. And as I like to do at the start of all of these videos is kind of just do a brief who's being threatened, who's not being threatened, because if you don't want to watch anymore, why watch a 15-minute video to find out later that there's no threat to you? But this is basically the tropical threats for the next 5 days, and they are, of course, elevated. We call them actual when there are hurricane conditions along the northern coast of the Dominican Republic there, and they're high for the Turks and Caicos, where Fiona will be going next, possibly impacting those islands with hurricane force winds. And then after that, they are moderate in the southeast Bahamas and the Anaguas, which means folks need to pay attention and maybe secure items that could be blown around easily, and they are relatively low in the central Bahamas. They're also moderate. The tropical threat condition is moderate for Bermuda, with the possibility it's going to get elevated to high in the next day or so. The threat to Bermuda looks like it's going to be towards the end of the week, the Friday timeframe. Everybody else, though, is in blue as the tropical threats to the rest of the Caribbean for the time being, as well as the Gulf and the east coast of the U.S. It's non-existent for, say, making hurricane preparations, although we are going to feel the effects in terms of a huge swell and rip current risk from Fiona hitting the east coast, especially later in the week, and you'll be able to see that in the wind field forecast here in the forecast in just a second. So here's the latest advisory. This is as of 2 o'clock. Of course, the forecast track is based on the 11 a.m. advisory. We'll get a new one coming in here before 5 o'clock. As of 2 o'clock, 90 mile an hour winds, Category 1, moving to the northwest at 9. The pressure around 975 millibars, and forecast to drop. Now, the tropical storm conditions, they have receded from Puerto Rico, but the rain continues. I'll show you that in a second. A horrific and catastrophic flood situation. I know some folks say, well, you know, Puerto Rico is vulnerable. Listen, if you put 2 feet of water anywhere within a 1-day time frame, you are going to have catastrophic flooding. There's no system on the planet that can handle that much rain in that short of time. So of course, the folks in Puerto Rico dealing with that there, as well as the power outages. But as we go forward into time here, we can see Fiona moving away from the northern coast of Hispaniola there, making a very close approach to the Turks and Caicos with the possibility of hurricane conditions extending there. So this basically, as you can see here, there's very little white line here. That's the cone underneath, but I always say it's more important to show where the impacts, at least the wind impacts from tropical storm conditions are going to be. And then there's, of course, other hazards, flooding, storm surge, things like that. But if you kind of get are you going to be in the tropical storm conditions or the hurricane conditions part down, then you break down the rest, inland flooding, the storm surge flooding, and things like that. So this is this evening, 8 p.m. this evening, based on the 11 a.m. advisory, and then that's tomorrow morning. Their closest approach to the Turks and Caicos, and then there's tomorrow evening. And then as we go into the Wednesday and Thursday, and then that's Friday morning time frame there with the closest approach to Bermuda, and the forecast is for Category 3 now as it makes that turn and accelerates to the northeast. This large wind field here is going to be sending very, very large swells back towards the east coast, and so the risk of rip currents is going to be very high, and folks are going to have to take care there, especially if you're going to be on or near the beach. And then after that, it is a quick zip to the northeast into the Canadian Maritimes there, where the folks as well are watching very, very closely. In terms of the warnings, as of the 2 o'clock and the 11 a.m. advisories, hurricane warnings for the Turks and Caicos, tropical storm warnings for the southeast Bahamas as well as the Anaguas, and hurricane warning for the eastern portion of the Dominican Republic there, as well as the tropical storm warning in effect for Puerto Rico. Still some strong wind gusts, but the winds will gradually be going down. Unfortunately, it looks like the rain is going to be continuing off and on and could be heavy at times. All right, so here's the close-up of Fiona this afternoon. You can see the eye starting to become more visible now, and that's an indication that it's getting stronger once again. And these strong, very tall thunderstorms are now starting to encircle the center. That is also an indication of strengthening, and the possibility exists as well of rapid intensification. And there's a definition for that, which is 35 miles an hour, an increase in intensity over a 24-hour period. So you might hear that discussed. It's undergoing RI is kind of the abbreviated terms for it. That's the 35 mile an hour increase in wind speed in a 24-hour period. So that's rapid intensification. That's the infrared loop there. Here is the visible loop, and you can see the also the eye kind of showing up there a little bit more as the sun about ready to go down there and starting to get dark, but the eye is starting to become visible underneath the high cirrus clouds there near the eye. There's the radar from San Juan, and the center starting to move out of range of the radar, but you can still see these strong bands that are rotating through the Mona Passage there. And even though there's not much rain showing up here, it's mainly because it's out of radar range. It doesn't mean that there's not rain there. It's just too far for the radar beam to see it. And then, of course, these very, very heavy rain bands continue across Puerto Rico there, and that is expected to continue as we go through the evening hours. So that is what is going on there with Fiona, kind of the detail there, and a lot of this because the storm is now so well formed, and we know the steering current so well. It's all kind of, as I like to say, baked into the cake. There's not going to be any sudden surprises. It's not going to suddenly weaken. It's not going to suddenly turn left or turn to the right. The timing in terms of its forward speed may be have a little uncertainty, but basically everything else is just going to happen, kind of play out as it does. So we're going to turn our attentions now to a different part of the Atlantic here, and this is down in the tropical Atlantic, where we're keeping a close eye on a new tropical wave here. And let me get my orientation here, and we'll start to talk about that, because that is this system down located down here. And it's way down there in a fairly low latitude in the Atlantic, and it's moving to the west. It is, we'll take a close-up look there. You can kind of see the clouds kind of consolidating a bit. There's not any real strong evidence of any circulation, although the satellite analysis shows that there may be a little bit of that. I'll show you that in a second. And in the IR imagery there, you can see some thunderstorms kind of pulsing along as we go there. Now, in terms of the this line here, that black line there, and I apologize, my marker's not working, my drawing line, but that's 10 degrees north, so that's pretty deep into the tropics, and this is even farther south of that, around 8 or 9 degrees north. And you can kind of make out a little bit of a cluster of the thunderstorms starting to get going there as it moves to the west, approaching 50 west. There's the islands there on the left side of the picture, the Windward Islands there. The water vapor loop, so looking at some of our what we call our necessary conditions, these things have to be present for a tropical system to become more developed or to develop into a tropical cyclone, tropical depression, tropical storm, or hurricane. First is the moisture that's present in the atmosphere, and there is still some dry air around, but it looks like for the moment that this tropical wave is embedded in an area of moisture. There is some wind shear to the north there. You can see it and those clouds moving pretty quickly, showing up there in the water vapor loop. So wind shear would be a limiting factor. The low-level center shows up right there, kind of in that position just to the northeast of South America there. That's that yellowish area. That's the low-level rotation, or vorticity as we call it. And then you can see here it is just to the south of this big area of shear. So the shear would be low, which would likely keep dry air from being forced into the system, and also maybe give it an opportunity to develop through time. There is the deep layer mean steering winds, these DLM, we call them winds. This is basically the shallow winds that would steer this system along to the west, and they're pretty strong in the 10 to 15 range and up to 20 to the north. So it's going to be moving fairly quickly probably as we go through time here, 10 to 15 miles an hour, and approaching the islands as we get into the Wednesday time frame. So why are we paying attention to it? Because as we've said during this hurricane season, it seems like the key has been is the GFS and the European model, are they both showing some development? Because we've had systems where the GFS shows some development and the European doesn't. We've had some systems where the European shows development and the GFS doesn't. And in almost every one of those cases where there's not this model-to-model agreement, there hasn't been much development, hardly any at all. But the systems where we've had this model-to-model agreement, some cases it's been where one model jumps on a little bit later, some cases the other model jumps on, but when they're both in agreement, then we have seen tropical development. So this is the GFS this afternoon, and you can see that feature there in the lower right-hand part of the screen. That's the system that we're talking about here with potential for development. It would go through the islands, probably bringing gusty winds and squally weather. And I say the islands, the Windward Islands and the southern Leeward Islands there, as well as Barbados, probably in the Wednesday time frame, looking at that loop there. There's Wednesday and then even into Thursday if it's a little bit slower, entering the Caribbean there. And then most of those members continue on to the west there, and there's some pretty good agreement on it getting at least over the next 7 days. This is a 7-day loop here into the central Caribbean. Now, the Eastern Caribbean, especially earlier in the season, is notorious for kind of ripping systems apart. So it's in an area that is famous for not having a strong development potential in that part of the Caribbean. But it's certainly something that we'll have to track as it goes to the west, especially as it gets into the western part of the Caribbean. And that probably is going to be about in the 7 to a 10-day time frame there. Once again, this is the 7-day loop here. This is the European, and you can see quite a few members here. It's a little bit faster, gets into the Western Caribbean a little bit sooner, but the members come together there. When I say member, it's the ensemble members, many different versions of the same computer run. And you can see there as we get into that 5-day time frame, 6-day time frame, and 7-day time frame, beginning to get some divergence of the model there as well as it spreads out. So basically that's the latest. If you found the video helpful, interesting, give me a like. If you'd like to receive further updates as we go through the season here, by all means subscribe, and then if you click the notifications button, you'll be notified when we do these live videos. Now, I'm trying to keep them around 4:30 every day, but if something develops or it's more urgent, then we will obviously do them more quickly. But that's the Tropical Treks for Monday, September 19th.